Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon if you're east of California. Welcome to our webinar today, brought to you by iPass, and the subject of our webinar today is Making Global Wi-Fi Secure. I'm Neil Griffiths. I'm Head of Product Marketing here at iPass, and I'm going to be taking us through our session today. Today we're going to be talking about some of the trends that we're seeing with enterprise data consumption, user behaviors, how enterprises are seeking to secure the roaming Wi-Fi users and roaming data users right now. And then we're going to move on and talk about some of the techniques and methods that iPass is bringing to bear to make Wi-Fi, global Wi-Fi, as secure as your enterprise Wi-Fi or as secure as your LTE connections. So let's get going. Oh, just one housekeeping item. If you'd like to ask any questions, we'd welcome those. Please just enter them via the Q&A window, and we'll pick those through as we go through the session, and any that are left over we will pick up at the end. So let's get started. So here at iPass, we are in the business of running the world's largest mobile Wi-Fi infrastructure platform. We operate around about close to 60 million hotspots now, provided by 160 different vendors. We operate in 120 countries. Pretty much every continent on Earth has some kind of iPass presence in there. An interesting new continent that we've discovered is that are brought to us by a number of partners, including GoGo, Panasonic, T-Mobile, Deutsche Telekom, and actually soon to be United Airlines. And those services are seeing tremendous uptake within our enterprise customers right now, and it's an interesting extra dimension to our service, which is also placing some interesting usability and security constraints on both our users and on our platform and infrastructure, and how we deploy. And we will be touching on what we do around in-flight as we go through this presentation. So moving on. So as far as enterprises are concerned, you know, what we tend to find, and we have a number of blue chip enterprise customers, is that a connected user is a productive user. You know, we're all running around out there with our mobile devices and our laptops and our tablets and such, and you know, the whole landscape of enterprise productivity has changed beyond all recognition in the last 5 years, in that everybody's now mobile. Here at iPass, we keep very close tabs on what our enterprise users are doing in terms of bandwidth consumption. And we're seeing an average enterprise user right now consuming about 4.5 gigabytes worth of data right now, with an increasing proportion of that data being consumed over public Wi-Fi services. And the reason for that is that users are looking to consume higher and higher bandwidth applications, including advanced unified communications and meeting services delivered from the cloud, video content both from the enterprise and also for their personal consumption, for example, Netflix, and the plethora of new and very capable file sharing services is really driving tremendous amount of bandwidth uptick within the enterprise base. Certainly, we're seeing the increase in bandwidth consumption just for an average enterprise user using the iPass service is probably running at 25 to 30% per year in terms of the way it's ramping up, and it's actually accelerating. And that's across the base for all users. But if you look specifically at in-flight, we're seeing a massive uptake in in-flight because people have really started to discover in-flight Wi-Fi now, and are realizing the cost benefits around using in-flight Wi-Fi in terms of productivity and availability of employees. And people are actually also starting to trust the services a lot more now to actually run critical business applications and get work done. So we're seeing a tremendous uptake in the adoption of in-flight services, really starting in the US domestic, but now starting to ramp up internationally. Europe is also starting to ramp up now. People thought Europe wasn't really going to ramp because the duration of the flights is typically a lot shorter than obviously long-haul legs or US domestic legs. But Europe is really starting to ramp up now, and so is Asia. So you know, the takeaway here is that everybody's on the go. we're seeing that 75% of European and US workforces will be either partly or wholly mobile by 2020. And at least 74% of organizations have some kind of BYOD program or are planning to have some kind of BYOD program. An interesting additional data point here that's not captured on these slides is I was talking to a product management executive from a large cloud UC provider a couple of months ago, and he was saying that based on the analytics that they get, around about 70% of the users that are accessing their UC service, which includes high definition voice and video and content sharing capabilities, 70% of those users are actually accessing the service over Wi-Fi. So the Wi-Fi has to work. It has to be consistent in terms of its delivery. It also has to be secure wherever your user goes, and that's really the problem that we're trying to solve for here at iPass, and we'll talk about some of the techniques that we bring to bear a little bit later on. And the takeaway from this slide is, the additional takeaway from this slide is that 70% of enterprise data, for better or worse, sometimes on an uncontrolled basis, winds up on people's mobile devices, and that data has to be protected, especially when it's in transit. So there are some real challenges with connecting to public Wi-Fi, especially open networks. Most of them are built on legacy radius or captive portal authentication schemes, which can sometimes result in hacking or phishing attempts brought about by user credentials being passed around in the clear. Many open and free networks also have open radio bearers, and there's quite a few horror stories in the media about people sitting on planes and having their personal information sniffed by somebody using some very low-cost off-the-shelf hardware and software. A couple of things that people don't, you hear the horror stories around authentication and credentials being hacked and open radio bearers. What some people don't see is the other attack vectors for these networks, and those are really around unprotected backhaul networks that may be coming from the back of the provider's infrastructure, that may be transiting unsecured connectivity or gateways or infrastructure that isn't particularly secure. That represents another attack vector for somebody that wants to come in and sniff and look at streams. And also one thing that people don't see as well is AP spoofing, or access point spoofing, using a variety of techniques, including MiFi devices, actually, where you can spoof a popular SSID like Starbucks or Marriott or whatever, and have users connect to their AP and start mashing in credentials, trying to connect to their favorite website, without realizing that they're actually giving up those credentials to a hacker, who then connects to the real network and launches a phishing attack or potentially a DDoS attack against their infrastructure. And these problems around public Wi-Fi and open Wi-Fi are kind of going to accelerate as we get more autonomous devices and IoT devices and connected webcams and these kind of devices out there. You've already seen some interesting cases popping up in the media around IoT devices being taken over en masse to launch DDoS attacks into popular websites. As you get more and more IoT devices that are running around maybe in people's pockets and cars and vans and trucks and buses, you again open up the potential for an attack vector there for people to come in via unsecured Wi-Fi, take over those devices, and then once they've taken over one, they can take over a whole bunch of them and actually launch all kinds of attacks. We see multiple attack vectors within unsecured Wi-Fi, including sniffing, man-in-the-middle, data modification, transformation, all kinds of identity spoofing and application layer attacks, and also an emerging trend around, particularly around IoT, of denial of service attacks. So public Wi-Fi in general, it's not it's not the best vehicle to be transmitting your private and valuable enterprise data over, unless you can try and educate users around some common sense best practices around Wi-Fi, connecting to cleanliness in terms of connecting to public Wi-Fi access points. So yeah, so you can't really ban public Wi-Fi because people are going to seek it out and connect to it. Sometimes almost by accident, right? Somebody's connected to a public Wi-Fi hotspot in an airport as they were traveling through. You know, a lot of devices cache SSID and connection information, especially Apple devices, and they will tend to connect to hotspots that they've connected to before. And those type of kind of automated connection algorithms are kind of quite ripe for being attacked in terms of people spoofing APs and having laptops or mobile devices connect to those APs and then harvesting user log information or payload. You know, and people don't. Most enterprise users are really quite sensible. You know, they don't want to kill their mobile data plans, so they will seek to optimize and they will seek to connect to Wi-Fi whenever they can. Just sometimes they can be a little bit too keen on doing that and connect to suboptimal Wi-Fi networks. There is some user education that you can do. We see some limited successes around that. You know, making sure that users, when they connect to either back into their enterprise or to a cloud-based document or content sharing or collaboration service, always making sure that HTTPS is activated and they can see the little padlock in the browser bar. We're also seeing some success with enterprises briefing users around two-factor authentication and making sure that users are using that for both the professional sites that they connect to and also the personal sites that they connect to. I'm personally a big fan of that. And we're also seeing some enterprises clamping down on using cloud-based file sharing services, especially when connecting to public Wi-Fi. There is some hope on the horizon around public Wi-Fi, and that's centered around an emerging set. Well, it's not an emerging set of standards; it's a pretty well-defined set of standards around 802.1x and Hotspot 2 implementations that do, at least in theory, provide a higher level of security, an enhanced level of security, both for credential management and entry and also user payload. The challenge with 802.1x and Hotspot 2 is that the footprint that's available for your users as they're running around is relatively small right now. You know, iPass has about 160 vendors under management, as I was saying before, about 57 million hotspots. Only about 5% of our total global footprint is 802.1x and Hotspot 2 compatible right now. So as an organization, we spend a tremendous amount of time making sure that everything else that we've got, which is based on whisper and radius authentication, some public Wi-Fi, even some open Wi-Fi in airports and other places, and infrastructure and footprint rather that we may have curated into the network. We spend a tremendous amount of effort and blood, sweat and tears within iPass to actually make sure that that infrastructure that's not 802.1x or Hotspot 2 compliant is as secure as humanly possible, and we'll talk about some of the techniques that we use to realize that in the next few slides. So you can try educating your users, but sometimes none of this stuff works, right? Sometimes you've got to protect them from themselves. One great way to protect them from themselves is to make sure that they always have at hand a super secure Wi-Fi service that forces them to connect only to infrastructure that is secure, using credentials that are secure, and then activating VPN services over the top to secure the payload data once it's moving around. And fundamentally, that's what iPass actually brings to the market, and we'll talk about how we do that in the next few slides. So we take a kind of an end-to-end or soup to nuts approach to Wi-Fi security. We look at the entire service on an end-to-end basis as one complete attack surface, and then we chunk it up into individual components, and then we're looking at the individual components, and we're looking for every single attack vector that we can mitigate within each individual component. And we're constantly monitoring and optimizing around protecting for each of those attack vectors that make up the complete attack surface. And the goal here, as I was saying, is to make the unsecure as secure as humanly possible. One thing that we do place a great deal of focus on is not just kind of making something secure and then walking away. We constantly monitor and validate that the service is secure on a continuous basis, and we'll talk about what techniques we use to make sure that's the case as we go forward through the next few slides. So what do we do? Well, okay, we start as a service by making sure that a hotspot that we're directing a user to connect to when they're consuming the iPass service is actually part of our footprint and is a validated iPass hotspot and is not being spoofed by a malicious entity. And we've seen other people connect to it, and we know it's a solid piece of infrastructure. And we do that via a few different mechanisms. One is basically by continuously curating our footprint and making sure that we're keeping track of underlying MAC addresses and BSSIDs, or SSIDs rather, and making sure we're tying all those entries together so that if somebody accesses the network, when they try and connect to a hotspot that's being managed by iPass, we're not just checking the SSID and the login credentials, we're also checking the underlying BSSID or the MAC address to make sure that hasn't been interfered with and somebody isn't spoofing that particular hotspot. So we start at a really fundamental level by making sure that a hotspot that a user connects to is part of our footprint and that we've previously validated it and nothing has changed since the last person that actually connected to that specific hotspot. And this is a huge process. You know, you think about we're managing over 57 million hotspots. We're adding about 100,000 a month. Right, so that level of curation and validation is a huge exercise for us, and we have a very considerable cloud-based big data platform which is continuously crunching all this information and making sure on a 24/7 basis that hotspots that users are connecting to are actually owned by iPass and are not being spoofed by anybody else. So once we've validated that a hotspot is one of ours, and that's the one that we should be directing a user to connect to, we then validate during the authentication process that the certificate that's been provided by both the hotspot itself and via the back-end infrastructure provider has not been tampered with in any way, so that we check that the cert is not malformed, that it's the correct length, that all the checksums are correct, and we're checking those against an internal database that we have, and also the root CAs that our vendors actually use to validate these certs against. And again, this is a mechanism that we use to make sure that nobody is spoofing an access point and trying to make it look like an iPass access point and have users connect to it in error and then have their credentials sniffed, or even worse, the payload sniffed once they get connected. So there's a two-stage process here in terms of validating a hotspot. We make sure that the BSSID and SSID pair match, and then we're checking that the certificate and everything else about that hotspot is valid and has not been tampered with. So once we've actually validated the hotspot, then we can go through the process of actually connecting a user to the service and doing the authentication. We use an end-to-end high-strength encryption mechanism between the client and our infrastructure to make sure that user credentials for logging into our infrastructure are never transmitted in the clear. And after a user is authenticated for the first time, we actually transition away from using user credentials to a one-time password mechanism where there's effectively an authentication token that's passed backwards and forwards between the client and our infrastructure. And that's regenerated every time that a user actually connects to our infrastructure. So there's no realistic way that connection can be spoofed, or those user credentials can be reused even if somebody did get hold of them, and it's really very, very difficult to do that. Because after first login, our platform is then looking for the one-time password from the client subsequently after that first connection. Obviously, if the user machine gets wiped, you've got to kind of go back to the user credentials. So under those conditions, we send a new activation URL that includes the hashed user authentication token and credentials rather. The user mashes that URL, re-authenticates against the service, and then we reinstitute a one-time password mechanism. So extremely secure way of authenticating users that continues being very secure, because we're never passing user login information backwards and forwards. We're only ever passing these one-time passwords backwards and forwards, which can only be used once, and then they're never reused again. So pretty much impossible, I say impossible, I touch wood, extremely difficult to actually break into an iPass infrastructure at this level, because we're using one-time password for doing user authentication. So once the user's been connected to a validated hotspot, has logged into the service, and now the data bearer is up, so they're starting to pass data backwards and forwards and connect to websites, there's another layer of security that we can offer to the user or the enterprise IT admin, and that's the ability to activate a couple of different types of VPN service. So one VPN service is an iPass provided service that is included with the product. It's completely free to consume. It's transparent in operation. Your users don't necessarily even know that they're using it, and that's a last mile VPN offer. So when your user connects to the service, you can, as an admin, you can say, okay, all my users have to use last mile VPN. We will set up a VPN connection from the iPass client to the nearest iPass data center based on a latency measurement that we do within the client in real time. And we will run all the users' payload traffic across that encrypted VPN tunnel, and then drop the users' traffic out within one of our, I think it's 4, maybe 5 global data centers right now. And what that provides is security around the radio bearer and any unsecured backhaul that the network provider may have. We're effectively securing the data path all the way from within the user's machine, all the way to our VPN gateway within our data center. And this is a great solution for users that might inadvertently access a non-secure website over an open radio connection, or may have concerns about passing personal information backwards and forwards across a service that they may be consuming within a coffee shop. For enterprise users, we can also, as an alternative, integrate into a great many corporate VPN clients on the device itself. And there's some really very clever profile management stuff that we can do, where we can push VPN profiles down to the device and have our client launch the corporate VPN on the user's device and connect back into the corporate VPN infrastructure completely automatically without the user actually having to do something. So from an enterprise IT admin point of view and a corporate security officer point of view, this is a beautiful thing, right? Because now what you can do is you can have your users running around globally on aircraft, in coffee shops, hotels, wherever they are, connecting to validated access infrastructure using extremely secure login mechanisms, and then the traffic that they or any data that they send from that device comes all the way back to your enterprise across your corporate VPN completely automatically without the user having to start the VPN client or having to mash in any credentials or do anything like that. And the user doesn't have a say-so. The user doesn't say, oh, I want to switch VPN off, or I want to connect to this random hotspot over here. We can actually totally lock down the service so that you can only connect to iPass, secured hotspots, and then you can only send data via your corporate VPN within your enterprise. So, we have a lot of blue chip clients, a lot of people in the consulting space, and a lot of people in the financial services industry, and they love this feature because it's kind of a belt and braces approach to corporate security, and everything that happens from that device gets routed via their corporate VPN. And it kind of doesn't matter how insecure the infrastructure is that they may be connecting at the other end of the connection. Everything is secured all the way into their enterprise. So two options for VPN. You can use the iPass last mile VPN, which is, as I say, is a free service, very popular with individual users of the service to secure their personal data, or you can actually use a corporate VPN offer, which is very, very tightly integrated into the service itself, so that, as I say, you can automatically invoke VPN clients and load in profiles from all of the vendors that we show within this slide, completely automatically and transparently to your users. And as an enterprise IT admin, you can manage all this from our web-based portal and control how and when users access the service and when VPN is triggered and when it's not triggered. So very, very secure, very powerful, very flexible. Moving on, so we talked about the the bits and bytes and how we actually secure the service itself. Security is not just about how you implement stuff. It's about the methods that you use in terms of how you go about operationalizing the network. So we spend a great deal of time internally making sure that we're as secure as humanly possible with regard to the way that we actually operate the network. So all our data centers are SOC 2 compliant. We have very strict internal adherence to our security policies. We also, hubris is a terrible thing when you're trying to build a secure solution. So one of the things we do is we test ourselves. We use industry standard penetration test tools, and we're running those external to the network against our data centers to find any and all vulnerabilities that we can within both the service itself and the data center infrastructure in general. We also take a kind of a root and branch approach to security during the development process. So we start, when we're designing, we're thinking about products, writing requirements, writing specs, writing software, doing the QA process. We think about security all the way through that process, to the extent that all the way through we're running standardized tests against the code that we're generating kind of in real time. And so we're running fuzz tests. We're doing threat model analysis against both the software, the systems, and the infrastructure continuously to make sure that we're not accidentally exposing any threat or attack vectors as we develop new features. And we also, as we're rolling up new software releases, we're continuously running static code analysis to make sure we're not actually opening up any weird, day zero vulnerabilities in the service. So when something goes out of iPass in terms of a new client or a new chunk of software or a new feature, we place a great deal of emphasis in making sure that implementation is as secure as humanly possible before it sees the light of day with any users. All right, so summary. So, I hope we've been able to demonstrate here that iPass, as a cloud service provider, takes security incredibly seriously. We are a SaaS company. We have a lot of blue chip clients. We live and die on how secure our services are. As a business, we cannot afford in any way, shape, or form to have our services compromised in any way. So. We place a great deal of emphasis and internal resources and, as I said earlier, blood, sweat and tears into making sure our services are as secure as humanly possible. I think we're at the end of the presentation. We'll have a look in the Q&A window, see if there's any questions come in from the folks out there. Doesn't look like we've had any. That's great. I must have covered everybody's questions as we were going through the service. So with that, if you've got no more questions, going once, going twice. Okay, well, great. Well, thanks very much, everybody. I've enjoyed doing this session and briefing you all about iPass and our approach to security. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.